Antietam, Vicksburg, Gettysburg, Chancellorsville, Lincoln, Davis, Lee, Grant and Sherman. The American Civil War is a tragic tale of huge battles, towering generals, vast armies, and even larger casualty lists. And yet, at its heart, like all wars, it was a conflict of individuals. Men, women and children. And in this video, we are focusing on some of the youngest who have been caught up in the conflict, and in particular, the powder monkeys of the Confederate and Union navies. Now the war at sea and on the inland waterways receives less attention than the cataclysmic land battles that raged across America. But despite this, they are just as important. The war at sea saw the first battle between ironclads, the infamous Battle of Hampton Roads. It saw the first warship destroyed by a submarine, and of course helped the Union in its strategic strangling of the South with the Anaconda Plan. Many of the warships in the American Civil War would have been very familiar to Admiral Nelson, the victor of the Battle of Trafalgar, fought nearly 60 years before the start of the American Civil War. Towering wooden ships powered by sails and firing muzzle-loading cannons firing solid shot. But the war would see more and more ironclad ships, powered by steam engines and armed with cannons almost ridiculous in size. The ships themselves would have been also manned very similarly to the wooden walls of the Napoleonic age. Captains were lords and master of the ship. Below him, lieutenants, midshipmen and masters, then the professionals of the ships, the coxswain, the boatswain, sailmaker, carpenter, gunners, cooks, surgeons, topmen, landsmen, the list goes on. And then, almost forgotten by time and history, right at the bottom of the strict hierarchy on board a 19th century warship, were the ship's boys, and amongst them, the brilliantly named powder monkeys. So who were these powder monkeys? These were boys aged roughly between 10 and 12, although many would be as young as 8. They would be orphans, runaways, strays abandoned in ports, or taken on board by their fathers. Now it certainly was nothing new for boys to serve aboard warships. It had been a tradition for centuries. HMS Victory, Nelson's flagship at Trafalgar, was recorded to have 31 boys serving with 850 men. These boys would have been thrust into a brutal, harsh, and violent world of a 19th century navy. The language of the sailors alone would have been something to behold. Justice on board ship would be swift and painful. Not only would they have to work long hours in dangerous conditions, but it also assists a topman high up in the rigging, helping bringing up the anchor, scrubbing the deck, helping with the laundry, looking after the livestock, cooking in the galley, and anything else that men and officers could think up for them to do. But their main job was when the ship was cleared for action and waiting to trade broadsides with another man of war or shore battery. Being small and agile, they were ideal to work under the low decks, run through narrow passageways, avoid the fighting men as they ran from one area to the next, and up and down steep stairways. They were to gather powder cartridges held in the hold of the ship and bring them up to the guns. Running with these explosives, barefoot on planking, which could soon be drenched in blood and human remains, must have been a stomach-churning job. Imagine coming up to the gun deck, a powder charge in each hand, out of breath, terrified, your heart pumping, and through the swirling gun smoke, you lay your eyes on the effect of a closely fired broadside by an enemy ship. Men you knew, scythed down by 24-pound cannonballs and flying splinters the size of your leg. How these young boys carried on is a mystery. One private hunter of the 17th Virginia Regiment wrote about an experience he witnessed involving a powder monkey. This powder monkey, it seems, was serving a land battery of cannon, but the horror must have been all too similar to that on board a ship. Private Hunter wrote, "Long streams of wounded made their appearance on their way back to the rear, in every species of mutilation. Some were borne on stretchers, others swung in blankets, from whose folds blood and gore dropped in horrible exudations, staining the ground and crimsoning the budding grass. Further along, the troops of the 17th Virginia passed a wrecked Confederate battery, whose gunners and horses all lay dead and wounded, except for a little boy, the powder monkey, who had somehow escaped injury. Private Hunter remembered the boy. He cowered behind a wheel of one of the guns, with eyes protruding, hands clasped, teeth clenched, and a face wearing a look of horrified fright. Face so white, so startling in its terror, that it haunted me for days after. Now this role of powder monkey seems brutal and inhuman to our modern standards, but there were perks to it. On board a ship, there was often better food. Well, you had regular meals, which you may not have got on the land. Sailors would often have to soak their ship's biscuits in coffee or water because they were too hard to eat. Many times the hardtack was so old that bugs like maggots and weevils would be on them. To keep the sailors healthy and eating fresh food, the navies would often provide chickens kept in coops in the ship's stern. Powder monkeys would often have to care for these chickens when the ship was not fighting. Chickens could provide fresh eggs for the crew daily, keeping sailors from getting sick or hungry. On top of this, they would have learned a trade whilst on board. Helping and watching the professionals at work, they would absorb skills and abilities all about them. In time, a powder monkey may well have become a sailmaker, a rope maker, level worker, a cook, surgeon's assistant, a gunner. All sorts of professions would have been open to a young lad ready to learn and work. Powder monkeys served at the lowest military rank on the ship and were paid roughly $6 a month for their work. That is about $180 a month today. At night, the boys would not sleep with the rest of the crew. While every member of the crew on board slept in hammocks, the hammocks of the powder monkeys were on a lower level of the vessel. Might this have been because sailors have been known to entertain ladies in their hammocks? Down where the powder monkeys bunked must have been claustrophobic, with little light and dank. These dark and airless living quarters must have been little better than a prison. So does history actually record any powder monkeys during the American Civil War? Well, yes it does, but not many. The first one is James Marchand, who served aboard the USS Brooklyn. One of the arenas the Brooklyn worked in was the blockade with 17 other ships to take control of Fort Morgan near Mobile, Alabama. The Battle of Fort Morgan was a bruising engagement with death and destruction meted out to both sides. The Confederates would fight hard for the fort and the sea lanes. The CSS Tennessee rammed the Brooklyn and launched a ferocious hand-to-hand assault onto the decks of the Brooklyn. Cannons, rifles, pistols all roared back and forth, and cutlasses and cudgels swept down onto exposed heads. Many men working the great guns on board the Brooklyn were swept away by the murderous artillery fire between the two ships. Amongst all this carnage and suffering, 16-year-old James Marchand continued to restock the cannon crews with cartridges, even though whole gun crews had been killed and their cannons tipped over by enemy fire. Because of his bravery and that of his comrades, eventually the CSS Tennessee struck her colours and surrendered. 2 more powder monkeys were to be commemorated by their courageous actions, and in one of the most compelling incidents of the whole war. The Battle of Fort Jackson and St. Philip saw Oscar Peck and George Hollett on board the USS Varuna. Union forces were attempting to capture New Orleans. The task force was faced with an incredible myriad of defences, including rams, chains, water batteries, land batteries, and warships, not to mention the treacherous waters of the Mississippi. The USS Varuna never made it past the forts in the attempt to force the Narrows, but it was not for lack of effort or courage. Captain Boggs would keep his guns firing all the time, even when his ship was going down. The Varuna was rammed a total of 4 times, by the CSS Steamer, the Governor Moore twice, and the CSS Stonewall Jackson. Even with this terrible damage to his ships, Boggs would not quit. With the gates of hell in front of him, the Mississippi forts pouring fire into him, Confederate ships ramming him and blasting away at him point-blank range, he continued to fight. The captain of an enemy ship, one Lieutenant Captain Kennan, one unable to depress his guns low enough, fired a hole through his own ship to hit the Varuna. Through all this indescribable maelstrom of shot and shell, the young Peck and Hollett stood firm. The Varuna eventually gave up her fight and slipped under the waters of the Mississippi, but not before the young boys had been identified for their bravery under fire. Both Peck and Hollett earned the Medal of Honor for their bravery and for continuing to load and fire naval artillery at the enemy ships at extremely close range, badly damaging them. Each survived the battle and was awarded the Medal of Honor. Newspaper reports ran, "Oscar Peck, second-class boy, on board Varuna, in attack upon Forts Jackson and St. Philip. Coolness and trepidity attract the attention of all hands. George Hollett, third-class boy, on board Varuna, in attacks upon Fort Jackson and St. Philip, mentioned as deserving great praise." A further newspaper article turned the sinking of the Varuna and the bravery of one powder boy into a boy's own adventure. It read, "An incident of the Battle of the Forts. Captain Boggs of the Varuna tells a story of a brave boy who was on board his boat during the bombardment of the forts on the Mississippi River. The lad, who answers to the name of Oscar, is but 13 years of age, but he has an old head on his shoulders and is alert and energetic. During the hottest of the fire, he was busily engaged in passing ammunition to the gunners, and narrowly escaped death when one of the terrific broadsides of the Varuna's rebel antagonist was poured in. Covered with dirt and begrimed with powder, he was met by Captain Boggs, who asked where he was going in such a hurry. "To get a passing box, sir. The other one was smashed by a ball." And so throughout the fight, the brave boy held his place and did his duty. When the Varuna went down, Captain Boggs missed the boy and thought he was among the victims of the battle. But a few minutes afterwards, he saw the lad gallantly swimming towards the wreck. Clambering on board of Captain Boggs' boat, he threw his hand up to his forehead, giving the usual salute, and uttering only the words, "All right, sir, I report myself on board," and passed coolly to his station. So young a lad, so brave and cool in danger. This is the Medal of Honor that George Hollett was awarded. It is a 5-pointed bronze star with a crown of laurel and oak. In the middle is Minerva, the Roman goddess of wisdom and war. Her left hand is resting on fasces, whilst her right hand is clutching a shield emblazoned with the escutcheon of the United States. It is made of solid brass. The inscription on the reverse reads, "Personal Valour, George Hollett, 3rd Class Boy, USS Varuna." The official citation for the award ran, "Hollett served as 3rd Class Boy on board the USS Varuna during an attack on Forts Jackson and St. Philip. He rendered gallant service through this perilous action and remained steadfast and courageous at his battle station, despite extremely heavy fire and the ramming of the Varuna by rebel ships." But we must finish our tale of the unsung heroes of the American Civil War, the Powder Monkeys, and with the youngest recorded of that breed. James Vincent Johnston was perhaps the very youngest boy to give military service during the conflict. The Missouri History Museum in St. Louis is in possession of a Civil War photograph which shows Johnston in a sailor suit. The museum's research states that he was born in 1857 and was the son of one Captain John Johnston, the commander of the USS Forest Rose. The ship was a 155-foot steamer, which was patrolling with the Mississippi Squadron. Amongst her other duties, she conveyed transports, carried messages, and fired on Southern shore positions and troops with her 2 30-pound rifles and 24-pounders. As the Forest Rose approached waterproof Louisiana, the crew spotted a Confederate force attacking a party of Union soldiers ashore. The captain cleared his vessel for action and ordered his wife to his cabin and to lie on the floor. As well as this, he tied his son James to a table leg. During the exchange of fire and the noise and the smoke, he managed to untie himself and escape the cabin. Unbelievably, he immediately took the place of a powder monkey who had been killed. Even with his father ordering him back to the cabin, he continued to bring powder and shot to the gun crews until the action was over. James was only 6.5 years old at the time, and the crew were so struck with the boy's bravery and conduct that they had a sailor suit made for him with the quartermaster insignia embroidered on the sleeve. There can be no greater tribute to the service and sacrifice these young boys made on both sides of the American Civil War than the words by Steve Romanoff. They are from the song Powder Monkey. In days of old, so the story is told, of boys who went to sea, all of 7, 8 and 9 years old they say, to serve upon the warring ships, their captains and their kings, to serve the purpose they still serve today. To carry up the powder from the magazine below, from a hole too dark and crowded for a man. They called them powder monkeys. Every schoolchild ought to know the price we pay to keep a promised land. Send for the powder monkey, send him down the well. Send for the powder monkey, he'll fetch us a pail of hell. To keep our cannon burning, he'll fall behind the gun. We'll just send for a powder monkey, 'cause there's more where he came from. They come from the city sidewalks, and they come from the family farm, to trust their fragile futures to the wind. They come from the land of plenty, through the evergreens and corn, with more to lose than all the angry men. Was it the hunger of the family? Was it the anger of the street that drove a lonely child to Satan's door, where death was all but certain and damnation near complete, save all the holy innocent ashore? From high above the gun deck ring the orders of the realm, to roll out a battle cadence on the drum, as forward into darkness sail the cowards at the helm, and they shoot the stars to see how far they've come. Look at their sons to see how far they've come. So what do you think of these young powder monkeys? Have I missed anyone out? Do you know of any youngsters who served in other wars? Let me know in the comments below. To see our video on how shell shock affected men in the American Civil War, click here. As always, thanks for watching.